Hey there, and welcome to the Catching Up with Casey show, where we talk about anything and everything that has to do with building cohesive, vision-driven teams. I am Casey Watts, school impact strategist and the host of this show. Now, if you are here, then you inevitably are an instructional leader who wants to make change happen, even when change seems impossible. And you can do that if you have cohesive, vision-driven teams that have done clarity work. They know exactly where they're headed and how they're going to get there. These teams have done identity work, and they've built their self and social awareness skills. And they have done collaboration work, and they know how to move beyond faux collaboration to get to true collaboration where change happens and where people get on board. I'm so excited to bring to you conversations that help you to do exactly that. The work that needs to be done to build cohesive, vision-driven teams. Now, with all of that said, let's dive into today's conversation. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to the Catching Up with Casey show. I am Ronnie, and I'm going to let Casey come on a little bit. But I just want to take a moment to introduce to you all of our fabulous guests, and I'm just going to let them introduce themselves, okay? So once they start introducing themselves, I'm gonna just hop off and then I'll let Casey come back on. Okay, here we go. We're gonna start with Bethany. Bethany, introduce yourself.
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. I'm Bethany from Leadership on the Rocks. I specialize in coaching and helping coaches build their life and leadership on the essential rocks, so they can stop drowning in all the stress that they deal with. So you can find me anywhere, social media, or go to my website, leadershipontherocks.com. I'm going to kick it over to Alyssa.
Oh, I'm Alyssa Crabtree I'm so glad to be here tonight. First of all, thank you. What was Ronnie? Ronnie?
Yeah.
Ronnie now, but now Casey. I am so glad to be here. I am the founder of Crabtree Coaching Collaborative, and I work with leadership teams to remove the chaos because exceptional teachers and extraordinary students begin with leadership.
Who are you going to kick it to?
Oh, I'm going to kick it to Jo Lane.
Hi, my name is Jo Lane. I am a leadership development coach with Tulsa Public Schools, and I write a Substack for school leaders and coaches for articles that are practical and will help you in the field. And my social media is right there, EduCoach by Jo.
Perfect. Jonna, you're left.
Yes, thank you. Just want to say hello to Ronnie. Please share with her my, deepest gratitude for the introduction. And hello to Casey. Glad you could join us. Hello, everyone. My name is Jonna Lee, Executive Director, founder of Jonna Lee Consulting. I provide professional development and workshops for school communities looking for the most effective, productive, efficient systems, strategies, and processes that deliver results. So very excited to be here with this fabulous crew tonight.
Yeah. Well, I am so pumped about this episode. It was kind of an on the whim episode, and I just kind of reached out to some people that I think very highly of and said, hey, you want to pop on tonight and just engage in a conversation about this topic? And you lovely ladies were like, absolutely. And some other people that I reached out to really wanted to, but they, it's like spring break is going on and all of the things. So, but I'm really pumped about who I have in this space tonight, because I think it's going to be some really great, authentic conversation about something that is really challenging for educators, for leaders, and for teachers. And tonight's topic is when crisis strikes, how to lead teams using the right language, because this podcast is all about building cohesive, vision-driven teams, and we know that inevitably crisis strikes. But I want to be really clear about what we mean tonight when we're talking about the term crisis. And I created this list of different things that people might experience that causes a mindset of crisis that may not, to most people, seem like true crises. Here we go. So, ladies, if you have additional thoughts about anything else we could add to the list, be sure to add that once I get through these. So here are the types of issues and situations that people might find themselves in with school teams. Budget cuts, which really is a part of why this episode is happening, because all over the place we're seeing programs and I'm not just talking about curriculum programs. I'm talking about instructional leadership programs. So, for example, instructional coaching programs being completely shut down because people don't have the funds. A lot of those funds are coming from ESSER, and we all know that that is going away. So budget cuts, trials and tribulations with new curriculum, which is happening a lot, reassignments for teachers. When close teams get disbanded, that can create a lot of dysfunction in a school, shifts in administration, unsavory test scores. And then the other one that I thought about was negative publicity. So tell me, ladies, any additional things that you have to add to that list?
I have one. This one threw me for a loop. So I was a high school administrator, and the death of a student, that is an emotional crisis, and have experienced also a death of a teacher, but not as an administrator. But those are completely different kind of crises that you walk through emotionally whenever it's someone that you know.
Yep, absolutely. Anything else that you ladies are thinking of? It's okay if not, because I created, that was a whole long list.
I think that's an extensive list, Casey. And I think we're kind of, in thinking about that definition, we don't often talk about this just from knowing us on a more personal level. We're mostly, thinking through the lens of like instruction and student growth and all of that. So to step outside of that, I think is just a very important thing to think about. But I think the list, when I do step outside of that normal lens, you seem to, between you and Bethany, really cover it as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And
I would add one thing though. I think specifically in some context, I think there's threats of daily violence that feel like crises because they are, because we have a serious safety risk in our schools on a daily basis. And so to think about the teachers that live in crisis all the time, this is why I'm obsessed with this concept of how to help people cope with the daily stress of specifically being in an urban school, but I think that's true of all schools.
Yep. Alyssa, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
The only thing that I would add, everything that you all touched on has actually created a health crisis among our educators. And we see more and more of our educators having nervous breakdowns, having even health issues, heart issues. And it is because of all of these stressors that each of you mentioned. And that is a crisis.
Yeah. Right. And even the small things like trials and tribulations with new curriculum, that's not really a big deal per se, but when it's compacted by all of the other things that we've mentioned that happen at exactly the same time, every small thing can feel a little bit like a crisis. Would you agree with that?
Totally. You're taking away the one thing that I felt comfortable with, because everything else is an unknown or a stressor. And now I no longer can lean on what I actually felt confident in, the curriculum that I've come to know and, developed and made better every time. And now I'm like, I have to start over. That's a crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. And I want to share something that, like a personal experience that I noticed recently, and I mentioned it with some of the ladies here, but I've been working with a district of instructional coaches, and next year they all will be moving back into the classroom or into some other position other than instructional coaching, which is incredibly hard, right? Like, you've been in this position for however many years, and then all of a sudden your tables are getting turned, and you're having to pivot and go back to something that maybe you really love, but at the same time it's a huge change, and it's hard not to feel threatened and not valued and disempowered. Like, all of those things you start to question, and it really feels like a crisis, on top of all of the other things that we listed. So,
and Casey, I want to just piggyback off of that for a second, because it breaks my heart how some individuals handle explaining to instructional coaches or anyone who's about to lose their position and it be taken away, because they definitely, what's the term, gaslight it, or they go in, well, you need to do what's best for kids. You need to do what's best for, you need to make sure that you're doing what's best for the district, and you're not a team player if you're not okay with losing your instructional coaching job and having to go back to the classroom. And that right there puts so much toxicity on an individual, where not only do they not feel valued, but they don't feel heard, and then they feel like they're in the wrong. Mm-hmm. And I just, anyone who's listening today, if you are a leader or if your district is experiencing that, please do not say this, you need to do what's best for the kids. Or we all know educators are there to support kids.
Right. Yep.
Amen and amen. I mean, how you start any hard conversation is with empathy and understanding. Start there. I mean, there's nowhere else to start. You don't go in and try to pull the strings of getting their motivation so that they buy into the hard thing that you just told them. The human brain has to process that. And in your first conversation, you're not giving them time to process it. So you start with empathy of how would you feel if you just got told that message, whatever the message is. You got to start there with empathy and then understanding. And then later on, you can have follow-up conversations about support and moving forward, but not in the first one.
Mm-hmm. Right. I want to actually, with what you guys have just said, kind of jump right into this big question that this episode's going to revolve around. And that's how to effectively communicate with teams when you're facing what feels like a crisis. Because we know we have to balance honesty and transparency with also the need to maintain optimism and hopefulness. And that is a hard balance. And I know as leaders, we can get it wrong so often, even when we're striving to get it right. So let's jump into that. And I want to start by saying, talking about something that I've noticed before and how I feel like leaders can address it in a different way. Because what I notice sometimes is that there can be this, the ultimate optimist, right? Where the ultimate optimist is trying to make everyone think it's going to be okay. Like, we've got this. You're going to do great. Just think about all of the good things. Like, if we're thinking again about going, like, a whole group of people or anyone having to go back into the classroom, and you have a leader who's sugarcoating it, right? And they're being the ultimate optimist when that's not at all what someone needs in that moment. So my thought is, let's just name the elephant in the room, right? Like, let's empathize by stating what we know the reality is and the feelings that come along with that. And naturally so, right? Like, it's going to happen, and it's okay for people to have those feelings. Thoughts on that? Jonna, you want to jump in with a thought that you have?
Yeah, I think that there's a show of mutual respect amongst leaders to teachers when there's not this facade of like, it's going to be okay. And I do think that because there is a hierarchy that exists between assistant principal, principal, supervisors, so on and so forth, at the I don't want to say the bottom, but the ones that are most on the ground doing the heavy lifting in terms of instruction and student work are teachers. So when we look at the hierarchy, yes, leadership is, and I understand, rightfully so, right? But up in at the top there, but there has to be a respect, a mutual understanding, a show of empathy, as we've said, and not saying that you understand when you don't. Right? Because, and that's something I've had to work very hard at when coaching with teachers, not even around a crisis, right? So especially in those critical moments, it is incumbent on the leader to listen and just state the elephant in the room and not say, I understand what you're going through, if you don't, or if you have not been in that exact position.
Yep. Other thoughts on that?
I even want to, if you think of the story about the prisoner of war survivors and during the Korean War, and they talk about the way that they were able to survive when their colleagues were not is because their colleagues were too optimistic. They were too optimistic. I mean, they were able to survive because they were realistic. And I know that that's a drastic comparison, but it does remain true. You have to address the ugly because everyone that you're leading is feeling the ugly. And if you don't validate those feelings, again, you're just creating more problems and a very unhealthy culture.
But there is a very interesting Emily Dickinson quote who says the truth must dazzle gradually or the world will go blind.
Quote.
And so there has to be a delicacy to how we do that, right? Like, this is part of the reason why I don't talk to my parents about what I do, right? Like, they don't need to know what happens in the schools that I work in. Like, they don't have to know. They have to know these particular sets of information, that the work is really hard and all of those things, but they don't need to know all of the dirty details. And I think there are specific stakeholders in which we can choose to tailor our messages. Like, I don't need to tell the person, that lives next to the school exactly how many third graders are in red. Like, that does not serve a purpose, right? I think there are messages. If we use a stakeholder map and we overlay it, I did this with a couple of my principals recently, a stakeholder map, and we overlay it with actually who needs to engage with what. We can make really strategic decisions about our messaging, specifically about data, but I think that's going to be applied to all sorts of other situations.
Yeah.
I made a framework about this. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, I love that idea because what I feel like we're saying is we have one clear message. Everyone's getting one clear message, but they might be getting it in different ways. And they might be getting certain levels of the information as needed for them to, on their behalf, for them to function appropriately in their situation and state, in their role, but enough to be able to everyone to move forward. And that's tough. Super tough. I want to talk about recognizing the emotions actually and take that a step further. What are ways, and let's get really practical about this because we've kind of stated that we have to address the elephant in the room. Practically though, what does that look like, right? Like, you're in front of a team of teachers or a team of whoever, a school team, and you're experiencing these raw, unfiltered emotions from them. And it could be anger, it could be sadness, it could just be frustration, it could be confusion. How do we approach that practically?
I think that one of the most concrete ways to do so is by going to question asking mode about what are you feeling? The 5 W's. What are you feeling? How can I support you? When do you want to talk more about this? Move into questioning techniques, because after delivering the elephant in the room, there's nothing that speaks like anti everything we've just spoken about when a leader then moves into, so now let me tell you what happens next.
Mm-hmm.
There is that delicacy that Joe so eloquently put about needing to create a environment where teachers are now given that moment to process, as Bethany mentioned, and leaders are offering support through tell me what you need rather than let me tell you what will happen next.
Yeah. Yep.
Although I will say, here's my counterpoint on this, that in moments of crisis, sometimes you just need someone to be able to make a decision for you, right? And so there is, I think there are particular moments, and I'm not sure exactly what those moments are, but there is a time and a place for us to say, and here's what happens next, right? Because it brings a level of safety. Like just like if you're in the classroom, you would let kids process the emotion, but then you'd really, really clearly name the next steps, right? Mm-hmm. Because that brings safety to clarity, brings safety just as much.
Yeah.
And I kind of like what Jonna said, and then also with Jolene, that we have to acknowledge the suck. Like we have to give them opportunities to ask questions and talk about their emotions. And this is where I go into kind of like what Jolene said is it depends on the situation, but don't bring it up to people until you have some answers. So until you have some decisions made, there is a time, like if it's a curriculum change, okay, you have some time to come up with, this is our plan. This is our 30, 60, 90-day plan to implement this and field it. But then also, acknowledging, like Jonna had mentioned, they need time to process. In a true crisis, yeah, you're going to be like, we got to do this, do it now. Here's the decision. But even then, there has to be a moment of empathy, even afterwards, because we have to focus on humanity too. We have to acknowledge the humanity.
Mm-hmm.
If I can just back up, I think so many leaders step into conversations where they didn't do their prep. They didn't think it through, starting with, what is my audience, whoever that audience is, feeling? What are they going to feel? What are they worried about? What are their fears? What are their frustrations? Think through those things and address as much of that as you can on the front end. And you're creating this storyboard. We talked about having a clear message and speak to those before you take anything else, before you offer all the other things. So as you're delivering the first message, deliver it well. Make sure you're starting with where the audience is, because it doesn't matter what audience you're speaking to, their number one thought is, how does this affect me? And so you need to clearly, as much as you can on the front end, do that. And again, there's different kinds of crises. And I love, Joe, that you were talking about safety, because there's emotional safety, physical safety. As a leader, there is informational safety. For example, having gone through, like we mentioned earlier, death of a student or, death of an employee or anything like that, there's informational safety. Sometimes you are not allowed to say anything about anything and people don't get to know. So you have to consider all of those things, but then start in the heart of, if I were in the shoes of my audience, what kind of emotions are they going to have? What kind of thoughts are they going to have? What kind of fears? and do your best to be proactive in all of those things in your original message. And exactly like what you are saying, then you've got to allow them time to process and offer opportunities to have follow-up conversations. And that can look like different things. I think leaders learned so much. If you were in leadership during the pandemic, man, you really got to test out a lot of these things of how can you help shrink anxieties for all of the unknowns that are coming. Because that's like the number one stressor is they're going to start telling themselves stories in their head. What about this? What if this happens? What is, and they're going to spiral up. How can I start with, what do we know? What is truth? Let's strip away the stories and teach them those techniques. Let's not tell ourselves a story. Here's what we know. We don't know all those things. Here's what we know. And here's what we can do. And here's the conversation. And here's how we're going to have follow-up conversations so that there is a pipeline of truth and transparency coming towards you.
Bethany, I have a question for you on that. As a former administrator, you worked at a giant high school. It was massive. And so anytime that there were those messages that needed to be relayed, how did you as a team, like as a leadership team, execute the plan, or like were there any procedures? Because I can see, and I have seen it, and I'm sure you all have, how it could go terribly wrong when one leader has a message of this and another leader has a message of this, and so many things become conflicted. Like what worked for you all?
Oh girl, you open up a can of worms. Because that is the number one thing that can derail so much is when people start giving their opinions about things or what they think or what they thought they heard or the stories they're telling themselves. You can have 3 administrators sitting in the same meeting and walk away with 3 different meanings of what the next step is. And so number one, you've got to come together as a leadership team and decide what the message is. And you're almost coming up with, I don't want to say like a mantra or a scripted line, but it's got to be the same for everybody. So you're saying the same things, because otherwise you're going to have little sidebar conversations. And that's how it's like glitter. Once it goes, you can't get it back. And especially once it hits social media with rumors, you cannot get it back in the box. So you have to be very, very tight with that. And the principal needs to lead that. And the principal doesn't always have to be the spokesman, although I think they should for the most part. But whoever is the most empathetic speaker is the one who can help lead that conversation and start it. And then you coach all the other leaders in, okay, as we break into smaller groups, because typically administrators are over a grade level or a department, here's how you can guide that conversation. And bring your counselors in to help sometimes teach the administrators how to have that softer conversation with SEL, social emotional learning, wrapped into that. But I'm telling you, I've seen it go sideways. So what we did as a leadership team is, especially during like pandemic is a perfect example, we had a visual. We had a visual of, this is what we're talking about. That's not what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about. And it helped guide the conversations.
I imagine to add on to that, Bethany, you have to have very specific systems in place with everybody within an arm's reach of your school community. I worked in a high needs school district in the South Bronx. We had a handful of very severe situations. And when those systems were not in place, messaging became a nightmare. And so, when we think about the next school year, and I can't even believe I'm saying that, but in thinking about the next school year, it is incumbent on a leader to be able to say, here are our systems, here is our protocol for when these situations, when we're in red, when we're in, orange, so on and so forth, here's what everybody's roles and responsibilities are, within those different tiers of situations.
Yeah. And I think really administrators, you cannot take too long in being the first one to get the message out, because stories will spread and rumors and all of those things. Like I said, social media, people are going to be texting each other, teachers, departments, they're going at it. And so you've got to be very quick, even if you know nothing, saying, I am aware, I will get back to you as soon as possible. Just having that, it's almost like, as a little kid, like a toddler going around, but they reach back and they want to know that mom and dad, am I still safe? Are we still okay? Are you still there? You got to at least do something like that even if you don't have the information, especially when a crisis hits, you got to go into first aid, right? First, you got to stop the bleed and figure out, where's the thing at? And then you go into that hopefully planned crisis mode that you have with, department chairs, team leads. You're going to contact your administrator, but your administrator is going to say, hang on, we're having an admin meeting. I'm going to get right back to you. Right. And so you have clarity of communication, like those phone trees back in the day. Maybe I'm the oldest one here. I don't know. Maybe we had phone trees. You've got to have a plan for the communication, but you also got to have a first aid plan. You got to get that in action.
We have phone trees, Bethany. That's how when I was in school, that's how we got snow days. Everyone was calling each other. You knew you had your tree and you knew who you were calling next.
Nice.
Oh my gosh, I remember that too. Oh, those were the good old days, weren't they?
Mm.
Joe, did you have something to add to that?
No, I would just say, talking points is kind of lame now, isn't it? Like, sending out those group text messages, not as much fun.
Right. Well, you guys have kind of brought up two things that I want to talk about. First, and I'm writing them down, which is why I'm kind of pausing, but I want to talk about leaders as humans in these situations too, because we can talk so much about here's what you need to do and here's what you need to think about, but we also have to be sure that leaders know how to take care of themselves and recognize what's happening within themselves in these different crises. How do you say it?
Crises? I like crises.
Crises. Pisces. Octopuses. Octopi. All right. Sorry. Moving on. ADHD moment. But I think it's important for them to recognize what's happening with themselves. And monitor, how do I address this for myself? So what are some thoughts you guys have for leaders who know that they're about to come up on a situation where they have to be transparent? They also have to be empathetic. They probably have to utilize some skill sets that maybe aren't native to them. So speak to that a little bit. Who wants? Alyssa, go for it.
Every individual is different, but that is why I strongly believe in the power of coaching. And just because you're an administrator doesn't mean you still don't need a coach. So my first thing would just be every leader, who is your mentor? And I'm not talking about your buddy, your BFF, and even just someone you look up to. I'm talking about who is someone that can coach you even before the crisis happens. And so any leader who is in any capacity who is watching this, I hope you have a coach. Everyone needs a coach.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. I think of literally first aid, and I don't know, if listeners out there have gone through first aid training, but you got to stay calm. Number one, you always have to stay calm, assess the situation, what's happening, what's going down. How do I, again, kind of think of that, stop the bleed. You take swift action to respond. And again, a lot of that can look like stop the information, or get out there and say, hey, I'm here. Whenever I find out something, we'll let you know. But then you do like exactly what Alyssa said, call for help. You are never, besides an active shooter type situation, you usually can call someone and say, here's what's going down, help me immediately. And if you have that mentor and that coach in your life, they can do that for you. They can help guide you. And then after you stop the bleed and kind of conduct that first aid, you have to take a moment to recenter and recover yourself emotionally, go into your office, close the door, catch your breath. Because the number one thing is it's not about you emotionally in the moment. Everybody is looking to you. It's almost like, when a little kid gets hurt, and I keep going back to little kids and I don't mean to, but it's just such a perfect example of crisis mode, right? When a little kid gets hurt, they usually look at mom and dad like, should I cry? Am I really okay? Like, what's going to happen? What kind of level of emotion do I have? And they will oftentimes mirror what the mom and dad has. And so whenever you're in a leadership position, you've got to say, okay, I got to stay calm. I got to be this brave face. But then you do, just like they all need to process it privately and then also have support, you've got to be able to do that with yourself as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, we have to be okay with telling people up front, I need a moment to think about this. So if it's not a pressing matter, like in the moment where you have to make an immediate decision, it is okay not to be a rescuer of sorts, but rather to be a decision maker who has to consider all factors. And you say, I'm going to take some time to think about this and I'll get back to you.
You know those handbooks that every like school has, district, and it gets like lost in the shuffle, and you know, it's like throwing paint against the wall. What's in this handbook anyway? Go to the handbook if you want to know the code of conduct and you know what we do in these situations. And they're so underutilized and perhaps in some ways a bit archaic, I guess. But you know, they exist they exist for a reason. It's just a matter if they are properly used. And a handbook is sort of a center, a place that can hold critical information for what to do in certain scenarios, right? Whether it's a dress code or it's you know, teacher misconduct, what have you, right? Snow days or remote days, COVID, all of that. The handbook acts as this, you know, metaphorically, but also literally, the place where much of this information can be stored and referred to. And I think that I keep going back to where is your internal handbook? What does that look like when these situations arise? Do you have that? Have you created that? Has your leadership team you know, helped develop that internal handbook? Do you have teacher voice? What, you know, what representative of the parent community, of the student body? Where does this handbook speak to what do we do when we're in red, when we're in orange, when it's, you know, when we've measured the crisis that is in front of us? And it builds automaticity around how to react, and then allows us to take that moment to then, do you hear the back end on me? Is that me? There we go. It allows us to be proactive so that we can take a moment and then react when the time, you know, when the time is right. If we, you know, if we can take that moment before reacting appropriately.
You're so
I agree
spot
with
on.
that entirely.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
like the time to repair the roof is when the sun is shining, right? And the most planned person actually gives themselves more flexibility. Plan it out. Amen.
You know, that makes me think of a quote by President Dwight Eisenhower, and I can't remember the entire quote, but it's something about, you know, plans are worthless, but planning is everything, because the whole point of an unexpected situation is it's unexpected. But you plan. Plans are worthless, but planning is everything.
Yeah. David Goggins, in his book, he talks about having the plan in place provides the leaders with more confidence, more competence, more confidence, so that when chaos does ensue, they're not in panic mode. And I mean, that's just what everyone needs. They need the handbook. Put it away in a dusty drawer. Who cares? But when you need it, it is there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so even in, and this is a very minute example, very minimal, but as part of our curriculum department, when things go awry with curriculum, we look to our curriculum management plan. Okay, let's see where we put it in there. Did we not put it in there? Well, now that this has happened, now is the time to put it in there, you know, because in the case that this happens again, we want to be sure that it's written somewhere what our protocol is or what it is that we believe in, etc. So even to that extent, it's so crucial.
And you know what that makes me think of, Casey, is as a leader, because you're leading people, once you step into leadership role, it's no longer about the thing as much as it is about leading people who then do the thing, you know, or teach the kids and whatever the task is. But once you learn people and you really get to know people's habits and emotional needs, you know, all people want to be seen, heard, and valued, you know, validated. And once you get to know that, once you step into the true art of leading people, you're able to see around the corner of what's coming. So you know how to respond. You don't know the thing that's going to happen, the event that's going to happen, but you get to know your people and how they are going to respond and what they need in a crisis. And it helps you see around the corner a little bit to be prepared, like y'all were talking about, to have that playbook of, I know how to lead my people despite whatever the unknown event is.
Yep. So we're going to get kind of closer to the end of this episode, and this is going to be a little bit longer than usual. And I'm okay with that because it's such a good topic and there are so many things to talk about. I want to end this episode a little bit more lighthearted, and think about just the very, what leaders might consider a very minimal thing, when it comes to what teachers feel like could be a crisis. And let's just use the example of, I don't know, I'm going to go back to something very simple. And I'm going to go to maybe, we could either do, it could go either way, reassignments, or it could be like budget cuts where we're cutting a program or we're cutting a curriculum or we're cutting a department, whatever it is. So in those situations, we've kind of already talked about being empathetic, giving them time to process, giving them time to filter through some questions that you've asked and asking them how you can support them. Even still, once you get to the end of that and they've processed it, there are going to be those who we might say are still resistant and negative. How does a leader approach that situation?
Tag me in. Hold on. One thing, and you ladies tell me what you think about this. I am a firm believer in a collaboration on agreements. So when this information is disseminated and we have talked about it as a collective, coming up with agreements about how we need to move on. And if you are still frustrated, there needs to be an agreement of venting up and not out. And so having something along those lines and a really reflective question to the whole group who's impacted, how can we move forward in the most productive way? Mm-hmm. And I think part of that is going to be squashing toxicity and rumors and sidebar conversations. And so even just kind of formulating some agreements. I mean, what are your all's thoughts on that?
I was going to say, I was going to, one of the harsh realities, and this might be an unpopular opinion, but as a leader, you have to sometimes lead in ways that are measurable and more so by the book. And so if that means needing to have some really difficult conversations about, listen, I'm sorry that this is happening. Simultaneously, we have a job that we need to do. Where are you at in being able to do this job without adding gasoline to the fire? And if you feel like you can't do this job, how can I support you to move you into a position where you feel that you can do, have the greatest impact here? And those are difficult conversations, but as a leader, sometimes that's just what ends up needing to be the case. I think we are in a society where there's a lot of, and I believe in this, but there's a lot of forgiveness. There's a lot of understanding. There's a lot of empathy. And sometimes we need to be a little bit more by the book. And I don't want to say harsh because I don't think it's harsh, but there's a word I'm looking for. We have to be more firm,
assertive.
Yeah.
Thank you. You have to be clear with expectations and hold people accountable to that. I have an example, but Lord, I could tell you stories for days, so I'll skip all that. But what you end up doing is you have a conversation, a thank you for sharing conference about, tell me what happened, what you're thinking, what you're feeling. You listen with empathy to understand where they're coming from. But at the end of that conversation, let's say it's a very toxic person who is just running their mouth and creating all kinds of other issues or being disrespectful to a coworker. And you say, thank you so much. I hear what you're saying. Make sure that you understand. But this is where we're at. And then you just call a spade a spade. You can not treat someone like that in public. Let's just use that as an example. And I want to be clear with, you will not speak to a coworker in that regard. And so after we're done with this conversation, I'll send you a follow-up conversation about what we talked about today. And so you send that email about, thank you so much. We talked about this, this, and this. You said this, whatever, any kind of rebuttals that they have or anything like that. But you're documenting conversation took place as well as your expectations. And then the next level besides that email of accountability, it will then be a memo. So, or whatever your HR policy does, but there's definitely accountability that has to happen.
Yeah. And I think it was either last week or the week before, Joe and I did an episode together. And Joe, you talked all about like the purpose of accountability and expectations and being clear. And I think that this is where it fits in. They have to know and be very clear about expectations and be held accountable to it.
Yeah, I will cite a really incredible training experience that I had a few years ago, Deloitte Courageous Principals Academy, if anyone's ever attended. And one of the things that we discussed there is the sort of the change management bell curve. And I've been using this ever since, where you have, you scope out your people on this bell curve. You have your early adopters. You've got your on the bus, you got your on the fence, and then you've got your resistors, right? So theoretically, you got resistors that are like at about 12%. If you have more than that, then we got a real big problem with culture, right? But generally, what we know about change management theory is that we should spend our least amount of time with our resistors. We should spend first prioritizing our early adopters, then prioritizing our on the fence people, because the on the bus people will come along. So theoretically, we've got about 85%, 87.5% of staff that would be on board if we got that majority. Then you just look stupid, right? If you've got all these other people who are just rocking and rolling, like, often they'll just see themselves out. As we said, right there, that's the beauty of also being part of a larger urban district, is like, you can see yourself out on the transfer list. And this is, we still want you to be an educator. It just can't be here. That sometimes is a hard conversation, but sometimes they see themselves out.
Yeah. A necessary conversation. And I just want to
know about like leader time though. Like they need to invest in the right people. Like we spend so much time with those resistors and they leave anyways, and we want them to go. Like invest in the people that are actually going to make a marked difference on student achievement. Your high performing teachers are the people you should be spending the most time with.
Yeah. And a great read for that is John Gordon's Energy Bus. That's a great fable to start you off if that whole concept of what Joe was just talking about is new to you.
Yeah. Bring it, Joe. Joe bringing the truth to this episode. I love it. And I want to reference Brene Brown, clear is kind, right? Like we know that clear is kind, and it still can be really challenging to be clear because it does require you to be firm and assertive while at the same time showcasing empathy. But I invited Linda Ryan to come on this episode tonight. She couldn't join, but she said, only thing I can add remotely is Brene Brown's clear is kind. And she said, and Linda's spin, proactive, clear communication is kind. And that goes to a lot of what you were saying, John, about being so proactive, or someone was saying, be proactive with your communication. So here's one story that I have, which is very similar to what you guys have been talking about. I worked with this whole group of instructional coaches who are frustrated that they're going back into the classroom, and it was preventing them from being able to do the learning work together that I was there to do with them. And I had to take a moment to address the elephant in the room and say, here's what I know your reality is. Here's what the situation is. I know you need some time to talk about it. Number one, how can I show up for you in a different way if you feel like I need to show up for you differently? And they spoke to that. And then number two, we're going to take time, 5 minutes. You're going to brain dump and vent to the people at your table. Know your audience and keep it professional. And then know that after 5 minutes, we're moving forward with this content. And you can come along following our norms as I plan to do, or you cannot. And that's going to be ultimately your decision. And it changes things so drastically for them and for you, and almost builds this camaraderie that I think teams need in order to continue to collaborate well together. So
that was a beautiful example. Beautiful. Of empathy and clear expectations. Huzzah!
Man, where's Ronnie? If Ronnie was here now, she would jump in and just share how excited she was that you just...
Very quickly, if you don't mind, where is Ronnie from? I couldn't quite place the accent.
The accent was wild.
Was throwing us for a loop. I just wanted some clarification around that, if you don't mind.
Maybe Ronnie's traveled quite a bit, so
okay,
picked up all of these different accents.
Gotcha.
And they come out. She's just so crazy. I tell you what.
That girl.
She's just wild. Okay, ladies, we're going to wrap up the conversation. If you joined us tonight in the comments, as always, I would love to see what your biggest takeaways are. I'm going to ask you ladies to share like one phrase, one word that you hope people take away from this conversation. And we're going to start with Bethany, and we're going to go to Jonna, Alyssa, and then Joe. And then I'm going to wrap us up.
Proactive storyboarding.
Love it. Jonna, it's you.
Be anticipatory.
Ooh. Love it.
Do I need to explain that? Makes sense, right?
Anticipatory?
Know what's coming.
Yeah.
Be prepared. Okay.
Yeah. And hold on, because I do think there's a difference between proactive and anticipatory, right? Like you can be proactive, but to anticipate things is a different thing. Yeah. Alyssa?
Invest in yourself before chaos ensues, and have a coach or someone that is growing you.
Yep.
Alyssa, you have, are you doing something? Don't you have something cooking up?
I do have, if anyone is experiencing any kind of moment of chaos, like maybe you're already in the chaos, or maybe you even want to go ahead and be proactive and pre-plan. I'm going to invite anyone who's listening to this to come and hang out with me for a little bit, and we can talk through those things. I'm going to put a link in the chat so anyone can access that. It's called Stop the Chaos. If you're ready to stop the chaos on your campus.
Who doesn't want to stop the chaos? Come on.
Right.
Oh, so you'll put that in the chat?
Yes, ma'am. I'm doing it right now.
Awesome.
And I'll put it in the show notes too. Joe?
The only thing that I would add is address safety first.
Love it. Okay. So listeners, I hope that you gained as much from this conversation as I did. I hope that you will go off and be proactive, anticipatory, take care of yourself, invest in a coach, and ensure that there is a safe space for you and for all of your people so that they can approach any kind of crisis with comfort, confidence, and clarity. Okay, guys, we'll catch you next week. Be sure you catch the show notes and you'll get to see some of the things that we've mentioned. Anybody have anything else they want to mention, or where you can be found?
I do real quick. If you go to leadershipontherocks.com, I have some free resources there. And one of them is for buy-in. So go leadershipontherocks.com/buy-in. There's no hyphen in that. So BUYIN. And you'll get a little tool to help you craft your message towards the audience so that they understand it and know how to take action after that.
Awesome. And Joe, how do they find your Substack?
It's Joe Lane, which you see on the screen, .substack.com.
Love it. Jonna?
JonnaLeeConsulting.com. Everything's there, resources, all the goods.
All the goods. All right, guys. Thanks for joining. See you later. Hey there. Thanks for joining this episode. I would love for you to do me 3 solid favors before you head out. Number one, subscribe to this show. I've got a lot of great guests and content coming up, and I don't want you to miss any of it. Number two, share this show. Share it with your like-minded colleagues and friends and those leaders who are eager to build cohesive, vision-driven teams. And finally, connect with me on all the social media platforms. You can find me at Catch Up with KC on Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Until next time, go off and create teams that leave people feeling inspired, empowered, and eager for more each day.